Still catching up. I will put the content warnings for the books I talk about down below, as well as all the links that are relevant and that I mention, and let's just get into it. The first book I'm going to talk about today is Court of the Undying Seasons by A.M. Strickland. This is a kind of paranormal fantasy, and there's a lot of vampires in it, and it's sort of at like a magical school setting, like a magical vampire training school. Our main character is named Finn. That's not actually her name, it's her nickname because her family sold fish. And so she actually gets chosen as the human to be taken to this vampire school and to have an opportunity to like train and to actually become a vampire. And she's from this little village, and usually like the most impressive or the most beautiful or the most talented girl gets picked, but of course because of certain reasons Finn is the one who gets chosen, and she gets thrown into this very dangerous, very different world. She's trying to survive, she's trying to figure out who she can trust, and she's also just trying to like adjust to being a vampire, or a future vampire actually, and you know, figuring out her abilities and everything. And you maybe could already tell from the way I was summarizing this, I did not like this book very much, which was a big disappointment. I have really enjoyed the other novel I read from A.M. Strickland, which was Beyond the Black Door. I really liked that one. This one just really underwhelmed me. Finn was fine. Like, I didn't love her decision-making process, and as I said, I feel like there were parts of the book where it really leaned on like the fishmonger thing way too long to be interesting to me personally. And I do understand that like Finn is working with very limited options and very limited information sometimes, and so there were places where I was like, okay, I don't like what you're doing, but it makes sense why you're doing this. Like, I get it, you know, so that was good. And there were some moments with her I liked. There were some relationships with her that I liked, like a couple of the friendships I thought were really good. But as a whole, like, Finn, she isn't a character that's going to stick with me. Like, I'm even struggling to remember some of the specific things that annoyed me about her, because I just didn't have like a ton of feelings about her or this book. And then I did mention that I liked some of the friendships, but I feel like those relationships would have been a really good opportunity to like further explore some of the ethical discussions, and you know, like what people are willing to sacrifice, and like, you know, we like this character, but then we find out that they treat human like thralls basically, that they don't think that's a big deal, you know, when humans are like enchanted into being like herd animals essentially for the vampires. So like I think that could have been explored a lot more. And then also there is a central romance in this between Finn and like one of the vampires he's kind of her mentor. It didn't feel nearly as icky as those relationships usually feel to me. I think partly because the whole world and like setting is so messed up that by comparison, maybe it didn't feel as like unequal. And frankly, like some of the scenes between them were some of the better written ones in the book, or like more interesting, which is funny because like the actual like romance moments between them I thought were very well written and pretty good, but like the sort of emotional development of their relationship felt kind of lacking to me. Like I think the like drama of it all worked for me, but the actual like character development individually and together I was underwhelmed by. I did think the world of this book was interesting. I thought the take on vampires was super interesting, and sort of combining that with this magical school. As I said, I liked the kind of beginning of the like ethical explorations, even though I don't feel like we really did a lot with that. The other thing I struggled with for this book was some of the plot stuff, especially at the end of the book. Like there were some sort of twists or developments that I liked, or I was surprised by, or thought were interesting, so that was good. But like the sort of like ultimate direction that things went at the end, I don't know, it felt a little forced or out of nowhere. I don't know. Yeah, I feel like I was complaining a lot about this book for something that I gave 3 stars, but like I didn't hate it. There were moments I liked it, and for the most part, the reason it was disappointing is because it was just very meh. Whereas I really enjoyed the other book I've read by this author. So I have heard this is not their best, so I'm still like planning to try other things by them. But yeah, I gave Court of the Undying Seasons 3 stars. Next, I finished Pirouette by Kenley Davidson. This is the 3rd book in the Andari Chronicles, which is a series of kind of interconnected fairy tale retellings that have strong romance plots. You don't have to read them in order, but I don't want to be spoiled for like some of the bigger plot things, so I have been reading these in order. And this is a 12 Dancing Princesses retelling. Our heroine is Princess Alani, who is an outcast because something happened while she was dancing. Her kingdom is one where dance is extremely culturally important, and something happened one day when she was very young. I think it says 7th birthday. She was dancing, and suddenly, without warning, she displayed magic while she was dancing. And magic is illegal. It's very feared. I believe it's something punishable by death, and she doesn't get executed because she is in the royal family. She becomes an outcast, and like a lot of people won't even acknowledge that she exists anymore. And she also sustains an injury at that time that disables her, and so she is not able to dance anymore, and that is an additional reason that people look down on her. So there's a lot of ableism in this book, just be aware of that. And then our hero is Kirill, who we actually know from earlier books in the series, and he is from the kingdom of Andar, which is like the main setting of these books. And so he is here on sort of a diplomatic mission. Nobody's really explained to him clearly why he's along, because he's like, this isn't really what I do. And the two of them end up meeting up and eventually working together on trying to sort of settle these political tensions that are very quickly becoming very dangerous. And of course there is a romance between them. So I did not like this. This has been, I think, my least favorite in the series, and like you might wonder why I'm still reading these books when I haven't like substantially enjoyed any of them. And my answer at this point mainly I think is the sunk cost fallacy. Like I keep thinking it might get better, and I have enjoyed a couple other like short stories by this author that I have read, so I know I can like her stories, but this series is just not hitting for me. And as I said, this is my least favorite actually, and that is for a few reasons. One of them is the central romance of this book. I just really did not care, like at all. I think it intensified way too quickly for how much these characters knew each other, which was not very much. And the romance is a huge driving force, not just for the story, but for sort of the personal stakes of this book, because like the big political things that are happening, like there are also going to be consequences for Alani, for example, and we are supposed to feel that that is like extra dangerous because Kirill loves her so much, like he cares about her so much, and so we're supposed to be like extra afraid for her because of their relationship. And again, I just didn't feel anything about their relationship. Like I felt for Imani as a person, and I like wanted her to be okay, but it had nothing to do with her and Kirill's romance. And then Kirill was like in a way even more disappointing as a character, because I really thought he was interesting in previous books, and I tend to like his character type, which is that he seems like a very unserious playboy, but actually he has a lot going on underneath that. Like when that character type is done well, often they can be some of my favorite characters, and so I had thought that there was a lot of potential for him in this book, and again, I just don't feel like that was lived up to, because so much of the characterization stuff for him was about how much he loved Alani, which again, I didn't find convincing. And then also, in kind of a more general way, I think I just don't like the way that Kenley Davidson like makes her decisions for her stories. Like plot developments or like character choices, like who the characters end up, you know, allying with, or like how that's handled, who ends up being on their side or who isn't. Like just, I don't like a lot of the sort of choices in the story that the author makes. And then the other big reason that I did not care for this book is I feel like there is a pretty strong Orientalism element that I don't feel is adequately addressed. And there is a tiny bit of the book that is like pushing back against that, and that is like critiquing these like outside perceptions, but a lot of the information we get about the way that Imani's kingdom and culture like works kind of plays into those stereotypes in a way that I was kind of offended by. Like I just didn't like it. I think if we were going to have this sort of like Middle Eastern inspired kingdom, I think we could have done one or both of these two things, which is that one, I think it should have been like the stereotyping should have been like critiqued a lot more, and that should have been balanced out by a more nuanced view of this different culture, and basically like not been as like obviously repressive. So I think we could have done that, and or I think that there should have been changes made to the world building that separated this kingdom much more clearly from similar like Middle Eastern cultures in the real world, you know? Yeah, I didn't like that, and on top of everything else I didn't like about the book, it wasn't a great time. I will say that I continue to really like the retelling elements, like even though the big plot decisions that Kenley Davidson makes I don't tend to like, I really do enjoy the way that she takes fairy tales and like twists them or interprets them, some of the little Easter eggs. Like I really like that part of these books, and I also feel like her writing quality is really excellent. Like I like the way that she puts words and sentences together. I just wish that I liked the things that happened in them more. If I separate the two main characters from the completely underwhelming, unappealing romance, I did like them, I guess, individually, or I found them kind of interesting individually. Again, I think there were a lot of missed opportunities for character development there. But yeah, so like there were some things I liked, but as a whole, this just really didn't work for me. I gave Pirouette 2.5 stars. Yeah, but I'm probably gonna keep reading the series because at this point, I'm like halfway done. So at least the other books are a lot shorter, because that was another thing. This was like kind of a long book, so the fact that I wasn't having a great time with it, I think it was exacerbated by the number of pages. Next, I finished The Last Bookwanderer by Anna James. This is the 6th and final book in the Pages & Co. series, and for some reason I always forget to mention the illustrator when I review these, so I apologize. They are illustrated by Marco Guadalupe, and the illustrations are just lovely, adorable, perfect. Like I really enjoy the illustration, so I'm sorry, Marco, that I keep forgetting to mention you. So as I said, this is the series finale. It is a book about, or a series about book wandering. Our main character Tilly in the first book discovers that she has the ability to travel into books, and maybe some other abilities on top of that as well. So the books, of course, are a love letter to readers, and to stories in general, and to libraries and bookstores, and like all of the warm, fuzzy book lover feelings. And I can't get into many details for the premise of this book, of course, but yeah, this is the finale. Everything is kind of coming to a head. We have recruited other characters along the way who I really love. Specifically Alessia, I really love. She ended up being one of my favorites, and I also continue to love Oscar. He's probably my other favorite, but I just enjoy the characters in general. I really like in this book how Tilly's family was, I feel like, pretty actively involved in the story. I thought that was cool. There are still some like big things that we know about from early in the series that I feel like should be a much bigger like ethical question mark than they are. But that's okay. We didn't really, I guess, have time to deal with those, but I just find that a little odd and a little distracting. I enjoyed the setting in this last book. I also really like throughout the series, but especially in these last few books, I really appreciate the way that these kids, like, when they're going into these stories, some of them are very old, and so they recognize that, like, this is a different time period, but also that doesn't mean that what this person just said is okay, and they respond in a way that feels very, like, genuine for kids this age. Like, at one point in this book, one of the characters that they're visiting and working with a lot says something about, like, well, it couldn't have been a girl who did it, because obviously girls can't do that, and all of the characters, like, all of the kids, boys and girls, are just like, okay, weirdo. Like, they recognize what a dumb thing to say that is, and it doesn't slow down the story, and it's done in a really funny way. I just really like that. I think it was, like, a really effective way of handling that. So I gave The Last Bookwanderers 4 stars. It wasn't my favorite in the series, but overall, this is just a really cozy, lovely series. As I've said in other reviews, I have really enjoyed it, and I can definitely see returning to it as something kind of cozy and comforting. It's not like a favorite of all time like I know it is for some people, but I had a really wonderful time reading this. So yeah, 4 stars. Next, I finished The Case of the Disappearing Duchess. This is the, I want to say, wait, on the back, it looks like it's the 6th book in the series. And I also mentioned that this actually had a different original title. And so they changed it with the changing times of like what words are acceptable to use for Romani people, and I think that's really cool. And they have a note of the original title so that you know if you already have the book. But anyway, I thought that was handled really well, and I think publishers should do that. Like that, I think more of them should do that when these kinds of issues come up. So anyway, this is the 6th book following Enola, this is like a story that is like sort of a Sherlock Holmes adjacent retelling, because it's imagining that Sherlock and Mycroft had a younger sister named Enola, who was also very clever and who was also very good at solving mysteries, but because she is a girl in the 1800s, she has to use her abilities for very different things than her brothers do, in order to try and make her own life, make her own choices. And yeah, this was one of my favorites in the series, I think, specifically because I thought all of the sibling dynamics here were really beautiful. Like, I really love watching the characters interact in this book, and like seeing how Sherlock and Mycroft have actually learned they have actually learned things about the way that it is very different for Enola to just exist in the world than it is for them. And yeah, I thought that was handled really well. I thought the mystery was interesting. I continue to really like Enola herself, and how clever she is and practical, but also she, again, feels like a believable young woman. I gave The Case of the Disappearing Duchess 4.5 stars. I continue to really enjoy the series and the writing and the setting, and just the way that, even though they're so short, I feel like for the most part they are really satisfying at being a mystery and also a character study, and also a book that talks about some issues of the time period in a way that I think is really well handled. Next, I finished A Death Struck Year by Makia Lucier. I mentioned that, like, when I was reviewing Year of the Reaper, that I had already picked up another book by the author, and it was this one. This one also has to deal with a plague in a way. This is set during the Spanish flu pandemic in the early 1900s. Our main character, Cleo Berry, she lives in Portland, Oregon, and like the flu is spreading. Like, they are hearing about people getting sick, but everybody is still kind of, you know, thinking that it won't get to them, that it won't affect them, and of course that's not true. It spreads everywhere. It starts affecting everybody, and Cleo is, I think, 17. Yeah, she's told to stay in her boarding school, which is being quarantined, but she doesn't feel much safer there, and she doesn't feel like she's able to do anything, and she actually lives very close to the boarding school, so she's like, I can just go home and wait for my brother and his wife to come back. And she's also supposed to have like a housekeeper meeting her there, so like she thinks everything is going to work out smoothly, and of course that doesn't happen. Cleo actually ends up living on her own for a little while, or for more than a little while, and she joins the Red Cross. She volunteers because they are really in desperate need of like volunteer nurses, people to, you know, do the best they can to take care of the many, many people who are getting sick and dying from the flu. So I thought this was very well done. Obviously, I think books like this are going to hit a lot different than they might have in the past, because of course we are also currently in a pandemic, obviously in a different sort of like phase of a pandemic, because, you know, we do have vaccines with like varying levels of access, and of course things are a lot better than they were in 2020, for example, but we are still in a pandemic, and I think that that definitely affects the way that we read books like this. I've mentioned recently that I am still being very choosy about the books that I read that deal with like illness or pandemics or plagues, but I thought this one was really, really well done. I think that the feeling of like fear and uncertainty is communicated so well in this book, because like the building tension of like what Cleo has to do, because one of the things that the Red Cross volunteers have to do is basically like go into houses, like check on people, and see if there are patients, because the flu could hit so quickly and so badly that people could be like near death and not have anyone to take care of them, and not have time to even like tell anybody what's wrong. So like they would go into these houses, into these neighborhoods, and be looking for survivors that they could take care of, or that they could, you know, try to at least make comfortable or bring them back to the hospital and everything. So I think that like fear and that like compassion was communicated so well. Like just the emotion of this book in general, I think was very effective. medically trained, or maybe they were like a medical student, or maybe they had never worked in medicine, but they wanted to help, they wanted to do something. And so I think all of that was written so well and so like emotively, very effectively. There is also a romance in this book, and as with the other book I've read by this author, it's one of those where on paper I should have loved it, and in practice I was just kind of like, this was fine, you know. Like, there were some good moments. I think I wanted more build up. I wanted more of the like initial stages of their relationship, but there were parts, of course, that I did enjoy. And then also I think that even though the emotion of like the story and of like some of the relationships, even though that I think was very effective, I feel like the actual, like some of the individual characterization I think didn't feel quite as deep as I wanted. But yeah, otherwise I thought this was excellent. I thought it was really well done. I will say that it was sometimes incredibly stressful or frustrating when Cleo or some of the other characters, like, they'd walk into a building where they knew that there could be sick people, or in some cases they knew that there were sick people, and they'd like forget to put their mask on, you know. Like, obviously, again, that is something that we have personal experience with now, so it's going to hit differently, but like it's like at this point they knew that it was airborne, so like they knew they should be masking, and I was like yelling at the book almost. But yeah, this was very well done. I gave A Death Struck Year 4 stars, and I also think it was really effective as a story about this pandemic that took place in a location that you don't hear about as much, you know. Like, it wasn't one of the big cities, but everywhere was hit by this, and I thought that was important as well. And then finally, the last book I'm going to talk about today is The Grimoire of Grave Fates by Hannah Alkoff and Margaret Owen, and a bunch of other authors as well. They're the two primary ones and the editors. So this is such an interesting concept. This is a fantastical murder mystery set at a magic school that is told through an anthology format where like every author writes a different perspective chapter for a different character, and they all, like, you read them in order and they all sort of piece together this mystery as a whole, this murder mystery. The like headmaster, actually one of the professors at the school, who a lot of people really didn't like, he was a very unpleasant person, he turns up dead in suspicious circumstances, and so it's about figuring out who did that. Some of the students are suspects, some of them are like witnesses to something, some of them you're not really sure how they relate to the mystery at the beginning. And this book also highlights the different like cultures and backgrounds and identities of these students, and that is like a big emphasis of like the setting and of like this school, is that it's supposed to be about, you know, bringing kids from all over the world and all these different backgrounds, all these different magical types, and, you know, giving them a place to learn where they are celebrated for their differences and everything. And like, is that actually the case? You know, that's one of the things that this book is dealing with. But it's also about how, like, being a chosen one doesn't have to be for one specific background, you know, one like kind of character. And yeah, judging by the average rating on this, a lot of people really didn't like it, but I actually feel like this, for the most part, worked really well for me. I thought it was, like, obviously it's a very ambitious like setup, but I actually feel like it came together really well. Like, I thought that the combination of the stories, like, they were individual stories, but I feel like they did feel cohesive enough to tell a complete mystery. There were definitely some stories that I liked a lot more than others, which, you know, pretty much happens with any anthology. I wish they had like a sort of table of contents so I could maybe be reminded of which were some of my favorites, but I feel like for the most part it was like authors that I already knew I enjoyed, like Preeti Chhibber. I have really enjoyed some of her short stories before. Darcy Little Badger I love. Kwame Mbalia I liked. I think Karuna Riazi was another favorite of mine, and I feel like maybe Hafsa Faisal. I feel like I also really enjoyed hers, and I hadn't read anything from her before. So I feel like I would have liked to maybe discover a few more authors than I did from this. I thought the setting was interesting. I thought the sort of mixed media format was really great. Like, there's like emails and like depositions and interviews for some of them. I thought that was very cool, and again, very well used. I do feel like this is not really the kind of book you read to get super connected to like a specific Like, there were definitely stories that stood out to me for how much I, like, immediately was invested in the character. Again, those tended to be authors that I knew I enjoyed. But in general, this is not really, like, a character-focused kind of story. It's more about the concept and the mystery and the themes. And I also really loved the variety of magic that we heard about and how that was connected to these students' like, background and culture. I thought that was incredibly cool and well done. I feel like the main drawback for me with this one is that there were several stories where there was, like, some really extreme insta-love, and, like, not just that happened, but also, like, it was a motivation for some really big choices, like, some really dangerous choices. Like, people were literally, like, willing to die, or, like, willing to go to magical prison for life, for somebody that they had known for, like, less than a week. And, like, I know that, like, sometimes that kind of extreme attachment can happen in real life, but, like, in books, I feel like that is a tough choice to pull off and to make interesting to readers and convincing to readers. I feel like there were some aspects of the actual, like, mystery resolution or, like, figuring out that I think could have been a little more interesting or engaging, but as a whole, I really liked this. I gave the Grimoire of Grave Fates 4 stars. As I said, I think a lot of people have not been enjoying it, but I thought it was good. Okay, everybody, so those were the next group of books I had to talk about. Please comment down below, let me know what you thought of any of these, or if you're interested in any of them. Had a mixed bag this time, but definitely a few that were hits. Thank you guys so much for watching. I will see you soon with another video, and I hope you love the next book you